Hi guys, welcome to another installment of Chewy's Magic Blog. Unfortunately, the Xbox app, which is the Windows default recording software that's built into Windows 10, I'm cheap, so I haven't bought proper stuff, and not very many people actually watch these videos, so it's more for myself. So I'm not going to spend hundreds of dollars on licensing for something that is just for myself. I would rather spend that on cards. Anyway, so taking a sip of my cup of tea because it's 8:30 at night and it's a good time for a cup of tea. Anyway, so this is a continuation of my Affinity tuning series. For those that haven't seen the first videos, I will put a link in the description here so you can go back and have a look if you so wish. But basically, I wanted to explore all of the options that Affinity has to it. Galvanic Blast versus Fatal Push versus Dispatch, Master of Ethereum versus Edge Champion, the mana base, etc. So the differences from the last video to this one, I'll start with the mana base. So my previous mana base had -1 Inkmoth Nexus, +1 Glimmervoid, -1 Spire of Industry, +1 Glimmervoid. So I have swapped out a coloured source for another coloured source and a manland, basically. So I've lost a little bit of explosiveness when it comes to casting my spells, but I removed that very occasional situation where you draw both of your Glimmervoids and the lands and you get blown out and things are awful. And having the extra manland lets you attack better, and Blinkmoth pumps Inkmoth, and that is quite relevant. The 0-drops remain the same because I can't imagine Wizards printing better 0-drops than what they've given us here. Galvanic Blast is, I think, where you want to be. You want the full complement of Galvanic Blasts in your starting 60 cards. Just leave a red up or have access to red, and the Death Shadow player has to really think, and you can often catch them out. It's a quality removal spell. Otherwise, it's the 5/5 from Eldrazi, the Reality Smashers and the like that that it doesn't kill, that are a problem for it. But in those matchups, you are trying to race, and 1 mana does 4 damage, and that's a pretty good way to race. Full complement of Overseers, Ravagers, Platings, and Vault Scourges at the 2 mana drop, even though Vault Scourge, I guess, that makes a lot more sense if that is there. But that's not moving for me for whatever reason. Must be the way I've got to sort. And I've got 3 copies of Master of Ethereum. So previously I had a 2-2 split between Champion and Master, but I made the decision on Master in the main deck, at least for now, all subject to change. But I want to be able to race combo decks game 1 and then bring in some hate game 2. Master is always just a 3 mana, 5/5, 6/6, 7/7, 8/8. He's always huge and pumps the rest of your team. So good in the mirror, good against other creature decks because he just makes your dudes bigger than theirs. So Lingering Souls is an enormous problem for this deck. And whilst the Edge Champion is a fantastic answer to that, Master at least pumps the rest of your team and lets you bash in. Edge Champion is in the board as a foil for those quote unquote fair decks, but it's Master's just better in more matchups, better against Eldrazi Tron, better at racing combo decks, better at just having bigger dudes than other creature decks, and better in the mirror. So Thoughtcast is an interesting choice. I've got 1 Thoughtcast in over the 4th Master. This one's a bit of an experiment. So it could be a 4th Master. It could be a Welding Jar. it could be a Thoughtcast. It could be a Spellskite. So there's a number of cards that it could be. Bomat Courier even. So I have decided to go with the Thoughtcast because it's a card I like, and there are situations where you're playing off the top and it's a bit of a board stall, or you're starting to lose sort of momentum, and drawing a Thoughtcast just draws more gas. Could be Glintnest Crane is another card that I'm really interested to trial in that slot. Glintnest Crane wears cranial plating, basically. It's a 1/3 flyer. It's just a pretty good card. So Thoughtcast gets you 2 cards, whereas Glintnest Crane digs a bit deeper, and you have the selection. So there's definitely merit in testing a Glintnest Crane. Moving to the sideboard, we've got 3 copies of Cont'1 Script for some graveyard interaction. Gone down to 2 dispatch. Had 3 in my previous videos, but it's just to kind of complement or supplement the Galvanic Blasts. Really good in certain matchups. Eldrazi Tron, Death Shadow specifically. Could be Condemn to blow out the Death Shadow player, and that is something I'm definitely interested in playing. That seems pretty good. Condemn your Tasiga, and your Death Shadow also dies, and that's not a bad little way to get a 2-for-1. Spell Pierce for against burn decks with counter magic and some combo decks. Thoughtseize is pretty good against control. Ancient Grudge for the mirror or any other decks toting artifacts. Lantern Control or the Primeval Titan decks. Edge Champion I've already spoke about, and Garper Ether Grid is sort by rarity, so I can get a look at this if we can, please. No? Okay. Garper Ether Grid is 3 mana enchantment, tap 2 tapped artifacts you control, and it deals 1 damage to target creature or player. So, it's a pretty good card in that sense. So, pretty good against Lingering Souls, which I have mentioned a few times as a kind of our nemesis. I was playing a copy of Whip Flare, and that's really good against decks like Elves, and even you could probably bring it in against creature heavy burn decks. Cleans up Goblin Guides, etc. But Ether Grid is good against decks that play Stony Silence, because it if they don't have Stony Silence on turn 2, you can bash them down. If they do have Stony Silence on turn 2, or if they're playing something like Lantern Control, it lets you grind them out. Decks that play any sort of X1, obviously Ether Grid's really good against. So that's the sideboard. Fairly happy with where this is at. One of these Tormod's Crypt could become a Grafdigger's Cage, I guess. But yeah, it seems to have the bases covered, and not a lot of like 3 and 4 ofs. Obviously, the Edge Champion, they become a straight swap for Master of Ethereum and Tormod's Crypt, because our graveyard decks are so explosive, you need that higher number. But everything else kind of just supplements everything else that we have. Like Thoughtseize and Spell Pierce are cheap enough to let you still deploy your threats without having to hold mana back up. Dispatch just upgrades a couple of Galvanic Blasts to improve things. You don't want to sideboard too many cards in and out with Affinity. You want to not dilute your game plan. So I've already played round 1 with this deck. Unfortunately, as I mentioned at the start, the video capture software didn't work very well. So if we jump into the previous games here, I can just talk you through the replays. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a not the most exciting thing to watch, because it's not live gameplay. But so we won the roll, and we got a decent start, and I instantly, seeing Mausoleum Wanderer, instantly had my opponent on Bant Spirits. and left Ornithopter back to block. My opponent hit me with a Path to Exile. Having the second basic came to the fore there, so that was pretty good. And my hand became quite good with the Master draw there. The Citadel off the top, pumping the Master and meaning I could get in some more attacks. I started to think here maybe it's just straight blue-white spirits, but yeah, I still wasn't 100% sure, and I was pretty confident I had things covered at this point. Cranial Plating plus Master of Ethereum, which is kind of a walking Cranial Plating, and my opponent never saw his third colour, so I still had them on Bant Spirits at this stage, rather than what they turned out to be playing once we get back to where we were. So game 2, you kind of already know that I won now that I've won the first game, and you saw the W's. But that's okay. This game was a little more interesting than just the explosive start. So this hand I was pretty happy with. Got a sideboard card. Expected to see Stony Silence. Expected to see a bunch of X1 spirits. So yeah, I was happy with starting the game with Ether Grid. I'm not sure why my opponent had Spell Pierce in. Maybe they were super worried about Cranial Plating because of the game before. But yeah, got out a couple of Vault Scourges, which is great. So here we got some attacks in. Force him to play the Queller and happily hit that with a Gal Blast, save one of my guys and get in some damage. So Geist of St. Traft is a fair clock, especially if he's bolting my Lifelinkers. But happy here to resolve an Ether Grid and actually make these Ornithopters, actually do something. So I knew the race was on here, and I think my opponent was a bit worried about the reputation of Affinity more than anything. Maybe they've not played against it a lot. Seem to make some unusual choices with some of their plays, but yeah. Got in some beats here. This is the turn that kind of swung the game, I think. Perhaps they're not familiar with some of the cards. So yeah, put Ink Moth and Blink Moth in front. He pathed one. I pumped the other. Got a land. Pumped his thing, and that was pretty good. Did the right thing and didn't switch his Fumarole, which let me get, which meant that I would have killed it. But here he does make that play, even though he didn't do it the turn before. And with the I'll just pause this here, just because of the play that my opponent made. It was really important that he switched the power and toughness of Fumarole, and with that ability on the stack, I pinged the Fumarole, so he couldn't switch it again because yeah, it was it would have meant that at some point along the way, it would have been a 1/4 and the state-based effects. Sorry, it should have been a 4/1 and the state-based effects would have done it. If I'd let him resolve that and then pinged it, he could have switched it back. So, yeah, I timed that well. So anyway, that's where we're at. So I've got some sort of board presence, which is an Ether Grid and a couple of flyers. And at this stage, Stony Silence doesn't do that much against me. Means if I play Cranial Plating, I can't just kill him that turn. But with 2 lifelink flyers in the air and a Springleaf Drum, and my opponent drawing a lot of lands, as you can see in the chat, he drew very dead. Multiple copies of Stony Silence and lands in the last few turns whilst I was pinging away. I'm not sure what he could have drawn. Maybe a Lightning Helix would have been good, or a I don't know what sort of larger finishes he might have been able to draw. But yeah, that is round 1. So we'll get into the actual matches rather than replays. Sorry about that, and we will